Okay, this is the Angel Dog Podcast. This is Brian again in our series on the Big Lie Theory with my esteemed guest John Seaman, retired DEA conspiratorial investigative expert and a former contractor that worked in Afghanistan overseas during harmful times, of course, 20 years worth, right? Anyway, so we've covered a lot of things in our past podcasts on this particular subject, which was we did the summary points of when John was involved in the Afghan narco trafficking, and then we talked about Benghazi, the terrible situation there, Operation Fast and Furious, the big lies there, the role of the NSA in unmasking. That was 2 weeks ago. The role of the media in silencing whistleblowers. Then last week we did Fusion GPS and CrowdStrike, which kind of took us into Christopher Steele and all of that. Tonight, John's going to cover the Russian Hoax Conspiratorial Agreement. He's going to explain conspiracy, if I can hit the right buttons on the slide presentation. And in these elements, he's going to talk about the elements of conspiracy for the audience to understand. And may I add, audience, there are law enforcement personnel that do 20 years that don't understand unless they do those type of investigations. Overt acts, statute of limitations, theories of association, in the conspiratorial acts, proof of the agreement of the Russian hoax, and then he's going to go into a timeline. And then, John, did you want to make a correction on something we talked about last week?
Yeah, I've got three corrections to make. I went through some of the broadcasts. One of the first ones on the unmasking, I misidentified the deputy attorney general that Holder had put in place over the unmasking to run the National Security Division. Her name is actually Tashneta Gauhar, Gauhar on that. Also on the Fusion GPS, I misidentified that it was Fusion GPS had a contract with Perk and Coie. It's Perk and Coie that had the contract with Fusion GPS. And then on DeVecchio, the Russian guy working for Brookings, he worked for the Brookings Institution. He didn't work for Fusion GPS.
Outstanding.
So those were the three connections on some of the podcasts. So I just want to make sure, so if somebody goes through the podcast, they say, "Well, that's not correct information."
Well,
now we're up 100%.
Okay, outstanding. And ladies and gents, it shows you what is involved as an investigator professional like John that has done this for decades. And you got to make sure, man, your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted. Ain't no doubt. We said it before. I don't know how they're getting away with what they do in federal court today. I just don't get it. Okay, with further ado, let the technical genius I'm joking, share the screen. John, tell me if you got it.
I got the screen. There it is. Yep, got it.
All right, man, on you.
Okay, today we're going to talk about the Russian hoax conspiracy. And what's important about a conspiracy case, it's the only tool in the toolbox that governments have to take down major organized crime cases, major nefarious conspiracies. So it's one of the essential tools if you're going to take down these nefarious type of agreements. This is how you do it. You use the law, the conspiracy statute, and the normal. What's kind of funny is right now, I believe they charged Trump under Title 18 USC 371, which is a conspiracy statute to defraud, and that's what they charged Trump with. However, when we get done today, you're going to understand they're the ones that have actually violated the law. They're the ones that meet all the elements of the conspiracy. And that's the important part. As a criminal investigator, one of the most important things we have to do if we're doing a conspiracy case is making sure that we meet all the elements of the crime. And that's one of the things I want to explain to the audience, to the public, so you understand what a conspiracy is. Out in the public, you get a lot of the media that puts out there when somebody says something, oh, it's a conspiracy theory, so they don't know what they're talking about or whatever. However, using the law, if you meet the elements and it's solid, It's one of the strongest tools we have in the investigative toolbox under the rule of law to take down these type of conspiracies. Good example was Watergate on the political side. That's how it worked in Watergate. Major drug trafficking organizations. And if you ever Rudy Giuliani and taking down the mafia, that's one of the main things he used was the conspiracy statute. So it's our strongest tool in the toolbox. So let's get into, for the audience, on what is a conspiracy. Let's talk about the elements, because there's three major elements. If you can go back to that slide, the first one.
Okay.
The major three elements are the agreement itself. Okay. That's where you have to have two or more people to agree to commit a crime, basically. That is the essence of the conspiracy is the element, the decision to do something nefarious with another person, okay? And it takes two or more people. It's kind of like a group plan. And then you've got to be able to commit a overt act. And an overt act can be lawful or unlawful, okay? And I'll give you a great example of a lawful overt act and an unlawful overt act. In a drug case, let's say you're a real estate agent and you've got Colombians that come to you and they say, hey, we want to rent that house. Well, you rent the house to them, okay? You don't know that they're drug traffickers or whatever. However, later on, you learn they're drug traffickers, but you don't do anything. That would be a lawful overt act on the conspiracy. On that you knowingly rented a house to drug traffickers, you didn't do anything. By your silence, you basically could be charged with it, but most cases you'll never be charged. You'd mostly be just a witness in a case to corroborate what the house was rented for. From there, it's got to have, most conspiracies basically are a unity of purpose, a design. So it's got to have some sort of objective. In this case, the Russian Hoax Conspiracy, it's pretty simplified what the object was. The object was to destroy Donald Trump's candidacy after he was elected president, destroy his presidency, and after he left office, to make sure that he never becomes president again. And that's the gist of this conspiracy plan.
John, and let me ask for the audience, the only thing I don't see is that if I'm involved in a conspiracy like you addressed with a real estate agent, does the real estate agent have to know the kingpin of that drug organization? No,
he doesn't.
Okay, very good.
No, and the last element of the crime. So let's get it. It's an advancement of an intention to do something unlawful, two or more people with an objective that, if committed, would be a violation of federal law. And in this case, the federal statute that they violated was the one they charged Trump with, which was 18 U.S.C. Code 371, which is the general conspiracy statute to defraud the United States and to obstruct the executive branch of the government. So that's where it comes from. Then you have what we call the substantive overt act. Let me explain that real quick. You notice John Durham charged Michael Seaman for lying to the FBI in his case. He didn't charge him under the conspiracy statute, yet Durham showed that the case was a conspiracy case. Okay, but he didn't use conspiracy. Why? Okay, he charged him under what we call the substantive count of lying to the FBI. That's what they charged him with. However, here's the good part of this conspiracy statute. Every one of these people involved in this conspiracy to destroy Trump have all legal liability under this statute. That's what makes the conspiracy statute so good. So what we're doing today is we're going to connect all the dots for you using the timeline, going through all this on the slideshow. That way you yourself can look at the slides in your own spare time, see it all, and then you'll be able to see how the dots connect. It's kind of like building a wall. You're building brick by brick on putting this together. It also gets rid of and cuts through all the media disinformation, all the misreporting that was reported, and it puts it in a concise manner so you can understand how this comes together. This seems like a difficult case, but in reality, this is probably one of the more simpler conspiracy cases that I could ever see from my perspective.
You know what, John? The more we've had off podcasts and telecon conversations and emails, I agree with you now. Now that John's educated me, I would agree that it does apply more simpler. John, back to the let me just go back 1 second here to your
right
2,
there.
3, 4, the fourth one down, statute of limitations. Could you explain to the audience now? And I have a question too. So
yeah, let me go through these
wouldn't we say now?
quickly.
Wouldn't we say now that it's ongoing?
Yeah, this is still an ongoing.
Okay,
this is what I've been trying to educate the public on.
Got it.
And if you notice the media, you see Sean Hannity, you see Mark Levin, you see all these people did great reporting. We owe them a debt of gratitude. All the reporters, all these people that have done their own investigations. You've got lawyers out there like Technofog on Substack. You've got a lot of these groups that have done some tremendous amount of work. What's missing out there on all this today, when you hear them on TV, you're Hannity, oh, it's the Russian hoax, with this, and they come back. Now, what's not being discussed? What's not being discussed is how do you hold these people accountable for their criminal actions, for their criminality and the conspiracy? Nobody's talking about that. In fact, last year, I believe Hannity and Kash Patel came out and they gave the misnomer, well, they got away with it. Well, I'm here to tell you, no, they didn't get away with it, because what you have is this conspiracy agreement. Once you decide to do it, it doesn't end until the last overt act ends. And that's where your statute of limitations begins. So a co-conspirator doesn't have to join the conspiracy at its inception. Okay, so in this case, you've got a long-running conspiracy, okay, since 2016. That's, I would say that maybe a little bit earlier, but I'd say 2016 is when this all comes together. And the slideshow is going to show that when we get into it. And then we'll get into when the agreement time, when they decided to make this great nefarious plan of theirs on there. An overt act committed by one of the co-conspirators implicates all the members of the conspiracy. Yes. So, for instance, the FBI agents, Elva Chan, who was still in college or whatever, and now he's a member of the FBI, but he partook what? What did he do? He was leading the cyber unit, conspired with the big tech people to do what? To suppress information from the public. He joined the conspiracy at that point, because the purpose of the conspiracy at that point was to keep Trump from being elected and interfere in the 2020 election. So that's my example of why, when I say it's a continuing conspiracy, that's why we're going to connect all the overt acts throughout the conspiracy. Can you put that slide back, the other one back up?
Sure.
There's one part I'd like to cover.
Sure.
The statutes of limitations, okay? This is the, here's the other important element that the public needs to know. Statements made by one of the co-conspirators in furtherance of the conspiracy is binding on all the other members of the conspiracy, on the theory is that they're acting as an agent on the overall conspiracy. So let me boilerplate this down real simple. The Russian hoax. They put together the Russian narrative that Trump was colluding with the Russian. We all know that that was all a big lie. And that's one of the themes we're trying to get through, is using the big lie theory of how they did this. And so by them all going out and telling the public, doing interviews, telling that Trump's a traitor, he did X, Y, and Z, those can all be used as evidence later on down the road if we ever get an attorney general and a president to charge all these people under the 18 USC 371.
John, I have a question on that, and for the audience,
yes.
Sure. So let's banter this for a second. So how about and I'm sure you're going to cover it. How about the media involved or an individual representing the media? I'm just going to pick on the New York Times, for example. Sorry, New York Times. Let's say that in collusion with the FBI, and they are promoting misinformation or disinformation based on the hoax theory. Are they in the conspiracy?
Well, you know, you've got that standard there that the media has this blind coverage that they can, you know, their job's to report. How they report it is up to them. However, I kind of I was talking to my mentor who taught me conspiracy law, and I said that's one of the themes I would do. I would try and probably charge or include some of the, not all the media, just selected members of the media that they used. And I'll give you a great example. You've got in Durham's search warrants on Fusion GPS. Well, you've got emails from reporters talking on how to write their stories and to help out and move. That to me, I think would fall under the criminal side. It would show their intent to be involved. They've left their reporter status, their unbiased status, to be honest reporters. So yeah, I would include the selected reporters, because what the public needs to understand, none of this, what we're watching today, this crazy Twilight Zone system we're in, where you've got a former president charged by the people that should be charged. That's what's so crazy, using the same law that should be applied to them. However, they're the ones you're going to see today that violated the law, and they're using the law to stretch it to try to make it. But that's where Smith is going to have a very difficult time proving his case, because the element of you've got to establish the agreement, and if you can't establish the agreement, there is no conspiracy. You're not going anywhere. You've got to have that agreement of two or more people. So you've got to have somebody sit there and go, John Seaman and Brian sat in a room and they conspired and concocted this plan. And they took off from there. And then you had a multitudes of 20, 30 people join it. That's a conspiracy. That's how it works. But if you don't have any evidence to show how the conspiracy agreement came about or can prove the conspiracy agreement, makes it very difficult. That's why the Supreme Court in their rulings and ruled that that under conspiracy law, you can use hearsay evidence, you can use circumstantial evidence to prove the agreement, because you may not have a witness that sits there and say, Brian and John talked about violating the law, and then you could prove it through other means, but that makes it a little more difficult. In this case, it's pretty simplified, because this is one of the first cases I've ever seen where you've got the conspiracy agreement out front coming in from a different aspect. And we'll explain that when we get into the slides at the end on how in the pertinent month of July of 2016. But let me get here to cover these main grounds so we can get into the gist of the thing. The statutes they don't run. Okay, you've got a 5-year statute. So when the last commission of the last overt act, that's when the 5-year statute of the conspiracy runs. So ladies and gentlemen, the conspiratorial agreement was in 2016. And in this case, I'm saying that the last overt act is the misuse of a color of authority, and the same people involved politically charging a former president. Those are overt acts of the continued conspiracy to do what? To destroy Trump. So that's where I look at the 5-year statute. So a new incoming president would basically have until 2028 to charge everybody, to investigate and do what needs to be done. And that is what I see guys like Mark Levin and some of the other on the legal side that give their legal opinions. They don't talk about the accountability question, because I always go back to this accountability question for the public. How does the country move forward as a country and restore the trust in the rule of law if we don't hold the people accountable in the Russian hoax conspiracy? And so this is it's got to be dealt with. This is the elephant in the room. I know everybody wants to go off on the Biden situation, but people need to realize some of the Biden overt acts actually are overt acts in this conspiracy too.
John,
so you could have two conspiracies in one, and that's how I
hear you say it like that. This is, and again, audience, and I myself am learning a lot of different things, even though I spent 20 plus years doing this kind of stuff, but not involved in the political arena. But this is historical if this is not pursued legally. I mean,
this would be
this could change everything in the federal statutes.
If this, unbelievable. Yeah, if the country doesn't deal with the Russian hoax conspiracy first, and you don't hold the people accountable for this, then I don't know how we move forward as a country from this point on, from a rule of law standpoint. So this isn't about this is about constitutional law and the United States on this thing. If we're going to have a rule of law, or are we going to be a banana republic? Or are we going to go back down the Russian road and show me the man, I show you the crime? Or are we actually going to be where every person has rights, regardless if you're rich, poor, or whatever, high, medium? And we hold people from the highest levels accountable. And in this type of case, where you have a conspiracy where the leadership or the plan was done at the highest levels, well, don't you think as an average citizen that those people and those that are supposed to protect you, the citizens, using the color of authority in their positions, shouldn't they be held to the highest standard of the law instead of, well, we don't have any proof, and minimize it? Oh, they didn't. I mean, this is getting insane on what's going on today on this deal from that standpoint. So those are the important things. So the last point is the venue. In a case like this, you don't have to, you could bring this case anywhere in the United States on there, due to the fact that you've got certain areas like Washington, D.C. and certain parts of Atlanta and certain parts of where this guy wants to charge Trump at. He's not going to get a fair trial. He's not going to get a fair juror rate. We don't operate like that. If they have the evidence, this trial should be able to go to a venue in the United States, take it away from all the political animus and all that, and get it out there so the average American on a jury can sit down and look at this and then decide, when the prosecutor presents his case, do they meet the elements of the crime? And that, ladies and gentlemen, that is so important. You have to meet the elements of the crime. If you don't meet them, I don't know how you prosecute. And if any judge allows a jury to make a decision where they didn't meet the elements of a crime, well, those are all grounds for appeal and to be tossed later on down the road. And that's where a lot of the prosecutorial misconduct comes, by overcharging or trying to extend the law that isn't there. And that's what we have today going on. So,
John, you want to go over that 2 or more trials can be held on the same conspiracy?
Yeah, they're under conspiracy. I'll give you a good example. You've got the Biden conspiracy, where you've got the influence peddling involved on that part, but you also have the Russian hoax part, where Biden was part of those agreements in the beginning on General Flynn and that part, and then in the 220 thing, the intel people, and then all the people under Obama are the same people working for Biden. So you really didn't change. All the people that were involved in that implemented the conspiracy on behalf of the Obama administration are now part of the Biden administration, and it's just a carry on of what their actions are. And that's why I'm going to explain the theories of association, why it's so important on the theories. Can you go back to the theory slide? This is very important because everyone is responsible for the offset, was foreseeable of the consequence of the plan. No one has to know each other. So the guys down there in the FBI that are like the Kleinsmith, he doesn't need to know that the agreement was made at the White House level. He doesn't need to know that. He just knows he's part of what? The resistant movement. What's the resistant movement? To resist Trump. To do what? To stop his policies. So this is the kind of deal. So they don't need to have to know each other. No one has to know what the other one is doing in the conspiracy. So you can have people joining the conspiracy within the federal government to do what? What's the main purpose? The main purpose is to destroy Trump, destroy his presidency, and to ensure that he can't run for re-election. And then is evidence against one, is evidence against all. So it all comes together on all these overt acts. When we go through the timeline, you'll see how all the bricks start lining up and how the wall starts building. And then the evidence can be used in more than one trial. I'll give you an example. The evidence that was excluded by the trial judge in the Seaman case can be used in the conspiracy case. Why? Because it's a conspiracy. That evidence comes in. The other novel approach, which I'll throw out to the public, if you notice that what Jack Smith is doing is he's going after the attorneys, the client attorney privilege, using what? He's using the fraud statute, which is the 18 USC 371. Well, the same statute is going to apply to these gentlemen, okay, if they get charged, because then they won't be able to claim like they did in Sussman's and DeVecchio's trial, client privilege like GPS tried to do, and Perkins tried to do on the thing. So that will be able to come into play. So all that information, that like the smoking gun text from Sussman, basically admitting he lied to the FBI guy, comes into play. It would be usable, whereas in his substantive trial for lying, it couldn't come in under the rules of the law, which was the right call that the judge made legally from there. So that's why it's a deal. And then you get all the previous overt acts that come in, and you can use all that information. You can use the letter by the 51 Intel people. You can use all the interviews of all the Obama people that went out to the press and claimed they didn't know anything. You can use all the interviews by reporters saying that there was a scheme when Obama left office. They were going to form a resistance movement, and people inside were going to resist. And I think we covered that in one of the first segments. But those are examples of the evidentiary stuff called association. What it does is it builds blocks. And what it shows is a pattern of conspiracy. Why that's important? Because a pattern of conspiracy proves the conspiracy. And that's how it comes together. Now, for proof, it's real simple. Direct testimony. I'll give you an example. Biden case. You have two direct witnesses that were part. You had two businessmen that were part of the conspiracy that are witnesses. So their testimony against Joe Biden, this being an influencing thing, is important because that's direct testimony. Then you have circumstantial evidence, which basically means A and B happens and then C occurs. So in this case, you've got, let's use the Biden thing because it's a current deal, and this is an easy one to show the public. Got Joe Biden with his son. He says he's not part of any of the business deals. However, he's there at all these meetings when his son's talking to business people, using his influence as a vice president in an official capacity. So what's the results of those meetings? Even though if he doesn't talk about business or money, he doesn't have to. The mere presence of him using his authority or his front as a vice president for the U.S. government, where his son's selling the Biden influence, what happens? C happens. What's C?
Yep.
Who gets enriched? Hunter Biden does, the Biden family does. Now, how does that happen, ladies and gentlemen? Does a normal citizen get millions of dollars that don't have any kind of skill levels to earn that kind of money? And then who as an average, think about this, ladies and gentlemen, you work hard. Do you go to a bank and do you set up front companies? So your check from your employer goes to one company and then they kick it to another one and then it goes to another one. Well, that's what we call in my business money laundering. And that's how you hide the source of the funds. And that's a great evidence to show how in money laundering cases how they deceive or commit their crimes. And in the Biden case, that's exactly what they were doing. I mean, you've already got the situation where you've got the vice president meeting with his son, with a Russian mayor, and with with a Burisma guy, and then you've got the Russian sending what $3 million through a bank that was under investigation for money laundering. I think it's Cyprus, and then that money goes into what? It goes into the business account of Hunter and Archer of their company. Well, that's money laundering. I'm sorry. That's
Clear and present.
that's
Clear and present danger.
that's as simple as I can make it. Then you've got documentary and financial. Documentary and financial evidence is very important because it doesn't lie. They're fact documents. Okay, the CTRs, the bank transfer, all that is solid evidence. Very hard to argue over that you got paid $31 million. And why were they paying you $31 million? And then the last one is the communications, the texts, the emails, the recorded conversations. In a case like this to me would be fun in the sun as a criminal investigator to do, because you have so many people involved in the overall conspiracy. And when you have more people are involved, the better it is for you as an investigator to interview, collect evidence, flip people, get them to testify, collect more. And that's how you put these cases together, ladies and gentlemen. You do it brick by brick. So for further ado,
John, if I may comment before you move on to the massive meat. Audience, this is for the audience. I made some notes while John was off of this slide in particular. The amount of open source information that you have available to you today to check any of this, number one. Number two, you're running a business, documentary and financial, and you're running a business with somebody who you know is a ne'er-do-well, whatever that may be, defrauding the state, taxes, whatever, like we're talking about in this conspiratorial, you're in it. If you don't say a word and you do it, you're in it. Or you are present, like we're talking about the Bidens, and that'll come down later down the road. If you're present and the other ones are involved in committing the crime or the overt act, you're in it. Am I right, John? Or am I missing something?
That's correct. We had a case years ago with ATF. We were doing a drug buy, and the ATF agent undercover was buying explosives, and the guy brought another man with him, and the agent made a mistake by not asking the man, "Are you part of the deal?" So when we went to trial, that man got, believe it or not, was cut off and was acquitted because we didn't tie him into the actual crime. He said, "Hey, this was a friend. He asked me to come along. I had no idea." So it's a good teaching moment. So when you have these, when you're a law enforcement guy and you're undercover and they bring people to the thing, the first thing you act, are they part of the deal? If not, get out of here. That's how you solve that problem on this stuff.
And one more, John, and this is for the LEOs, law enforcement community out there, or even in the military, NIS, whatever. You have so much available to you, open source wise, to go and get, whether it be subpoena warrants, whatever, emails, the servers, the whole thing. You have to do your homework on that. I'm sure you are today, you young investigators. Get involved in a cyber course. There's plenty of them out there on how to investigate. A lot of the major universities have courses on it that are taught by former LEOs like myself and John. I don't teach it, but John may. I don't know. Now, John, we're moving on here to the conspiratorial agreement. So we have a lot of information here. So, John, you're gonna have to signal to me when you want to move.
Yeah, I'll roll through this pretty fast.
Go ahead.
This is the prelude to the timeline. The timeline basically connects all the dots of the origin of the case. And that's where, when you're a criminal investigator and you're starting to do a conspiracy case, you always start at the beginning. You build from the beginning. How did it start? Who agreed to do what? What were the agreements? And then you spilled out what were the associations, identify the people involved. What were the overt acts? Were they criminal or were they non-criminal? And that's how you build a conspiracy case. The timeline also establishes a pattern of conspiracy to show the public this was a well-designed sedition plan using what? Using the big lie theory of Russia, 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 with the convergence of a corrupt government, the media, and big tech to do what? What was the objective of the conspiracy? To destroy Trump. And how were they going to do that using the Russia-Russian narrative? By making the Russians the responsible party and to cover up their criminality so the public would say, oh, it's the Russians. They did it. They're the ones involved. So, put the onus on them. When in reality, as you now know, the Russians weren't involved in this. You have all the reporting that the Russians were, but they weren't. And as we get into it here in a second, I'll break this down even more so for the public so you'll understand where I'm coming from. It also, the timeline, it builds a brick by brick logical storyline for you, the public, to understand how all this information comes together. So you can go back and look through the time period of when all this started and start looking for yourself so you can make the determination, is this a conspiracy or is it not a conspiracy from that standpoint? And then you got the evidence where they use the mode operandus, I call it, okay, the means. How did they do it? They did it by manufacturing documents. They manufactured crimes. They actually created cyber tools to break in and plant so they could listen in or monitor traffic in the Trump buildings, and I believe in the executive office. So when you look at how they did it, it all starts feeding together on this from that standpoint. From there. So it was implemented, when I say by the highest members. This conspiracy could not have occurred if not done at the highest levels of government. Okay. And it was done by the President of the United States at the time, President Obama. It was done by Hillary Clinton, who was running for president. It was done by members of the Obama administration, the DNC. You had a concluded effort with the leadership within those agencies under that administration. And then the conspiracy continued under the Biden administration because a lot of the Obama people involved in the first angle of the conspiracy are now involved in the second part, which is the continuation part. And we're going to cover that when we go down and we do the overt acts in the following podcast. But that's basically it in a nutshell. And what was the goal again of the conspiracy? It was to destroy Trump from becoming president. And when he became president, to destroy his presidency. And then after he he left the presidency, to destroy him from running again. And what did that include? What were the crimes? They interfered in 3 major elections, 2016, 2020, and they're doing 224 as in front of your eyeballs right now. So from that standpoint. So let's go into the, start connecting the dots, as we say, on the timeline. Go ahead, move the slide.
Okay.
Oh, let me explain making the Russians a responsible party. This is the good one. Think about this. Igor Vecchio, okay, he was under investigation by the FBI in 2009 and 10, I believe, for suspicion of working for the Russian intelligence service. And you'll see in the timeline, when he was working for the Brookings Institute, he made the comment about, well, I wonder if we can get classified information and basically sell it. And somebody got a tipped off the FBI, and they ended up opening a counter espionage investigation. What's funny is they lost sight of him after 2011, and he doesn't surface until 2016 when he goes to work with Steele on and part of the Brookings or with Dolan on setting up the premise for the dossier. And so the question you got to ask yourself, did the FBI or anybody in the federal government ever determine whether he worked for the Russian intelligence service? And I can't answer that question. This is one of those forbidden, unanswered questions that nobody seemed to want to ask or go through on the thing from that standpoint. Then you had the IG report come out with 4 footnotes that declassified footnotes. And one of the footnotes in there, I believe they identified and they attributed to a guy named Sergio Milan that he was the guy within the Steele network of subsources that was part of the Russian intelligence service, given the illusion that the Russian intelligence service was doing what we call a false flag operation on the U.S. government, giving false information to Steele to give this onus. And that's what they put out there on the IG. Then you had the Senate reports, and you had the Mueller report. But here's the bottom line of all this. Mueller spent $35 million, 18 prosecutors. And what did they find? What was the conclusion? They couldn't find any Russian collusion between Trump nor his team. That says it in a nutshell. Now, what they used to make the Russians the bad guys in this thing, okay, was the Sinclair information that started from the British Intel Service that started this whole thing off by feeding Brennan back in 2015. Remember, I think in one of the podcasts I told you in 2014, the Dutch intelligence service had cracked the Russian intelligence service Cozy Bear and Fancy Bear. And they gave the information to the NSA, and the NSA in real time had penetrated them and was monitoring everything those two groups were doing. And to this day, they may still be doing that on there. But that was the information. So going off that premise, if the US government was monitoring the 2 major cyber units that were supposed to be doing all this disinformation and influencing there, because they watched them break into the State Department, they watched them break into government facilities in real time in 2014. So walk that up to 2015. That's where Brennan and all this comes about, is when the British government, with some of the people in the intel service of the Five Eye network in Europe, says, oh, we're getting this Sinclair information, listening in on the Russians, that may impact or may have adverse information that Trump may be tied in, or his people may be tied into the Russians. Well, unless you verify that, it's just unverified information. And let me just tell you this from a public standpoint. If they had intercepted on Sinclair communications evidence that Trump or his people had colluded with the Russians, they would have declassified that information, and he would be sitting in a jail cell with whoever of that, because that's evidence of a major espionage crime, and they're not going to hold that information back if they had it on the Sinclair deal. In the end, what comes about, and this is what the public needs to know, the Brits who fed the information to Brennan that started this whole cabal off in later 2015, okay, the reason that kicks off is because the information was never verified. They never verified the information. Then when Trump got elected in December, and this is really important, December of 2016, a letter came from the head of British Intel. I believe it was sent to the president or through Michael Flynn. And in doing my research in some of the Senate interviews, the Brits say they determined that the Steele dossier was garbage, number one. So all that Sinclair information that they were feeding to Brett was untrue. There was nothing. So they did a mea culpa, and they basically, according to a whistleblower in the Senate committee, they basically apologized for being involved in starting this investigation. So this is where the timeline comes in. It all starts coming together. This is where you get all the activities. Now, let's cover this real quick for the public. Today, you have a two-tier system where right now, as long as these people are in power, you're living under an illusion that you have a fair criminal justice system. You do not. Okay? That is why the 2024 election is so important, where you, the American citizen, is going to have the opportunity to make the decision in 2024 what path road we go down. Do we go down the road to a banana republic, or will you go down the road of restoring the rule of law? Let me give you just a quick example on the two-tier system, just on the Hillary case alone. She was Secretary of State. She signed, like anybody that joins the government at high levels or any levels, and you're going to see classified information, you sign a form. I forget the name of it, but there's a number form you sign, you get briefings and everything else. For the whole time she was Secretary of State, she did not use her classified system set up in the State Department to communicate government business on this classified stuff. Also, all the emails and traffic that the FBI found on her computer system, they came out of what we call a closed system, which is, it means it's compartmentalized. All that information is in a room. It's in that. It's on computers. You just can't go in there, take that information out, and transfer it out. That would be a crime. Yet that information was taken out of these classified areas and showed up on Hillary. So there, in its own, tells you two things. Hillary didn't do it on her own. You had more than one person do it. So now you can see the extent of how they were able to circumvent the system. And we're talking national security here, and which is really kind of funny, because here you have talking about Trump, he's a threat to democracy and national security, when after you see this timeline and you see what they did, if you want to talk about who's a threat to democracy and who actually colluded or worked with the Russians, there's a lot more solid evidence on Hillary Clinton, Obama, and those folks, and there is what you're seeing today on what they're throwing at you on Trump. So that's from that standpoint. You also have where you had a congressional subpoena, right? Remember, they're talking about Trump violated the law by a civil ordinance under the Presidential Act that he's violating. That's what they're using the criminality to charge him with, on them having those documents. Well, Hillary Clinton got a congressional subpoena, and she was under subpoena for years to turn over documentation on Benghazi and all the stuff on her field. And she didn't turn over hardly anything until the end. And then the items that they requested, they destroyed. So when you look at, you've got to look at what kind of system of justice do we have here? Two sets of rules. And then you've got the situation where the FBI did everything in their power, okay, where all the violations of the law by Clinton and President Obama, and I say President Obama in this because he was communicating with Hillary Clinton over a pseudo email system. Think about that. The President of the United States is talking to a Secretary of State on a open pseudo under pseudo names, discussing what? Who knows? Again, this is why when I say if we get a new president, a new attorney general, why you need to investigate this from the beginning and walk it all the way through, because it all comes together with the same theme.
John, I know the audience has got to be, if they're following this like I am, and the homework I had to do to stay up with you, I'm going to ask you your opinion, your professional opinion question. If we get a new president who pursues with his administration go back and prove this conspiracy, do you think it will bring us down in the justice system and moving forward Aren't there other areas? I'm asking you. Don't you think?
Well, I think
it
it would do this, Brian. I
Right.
think this is it. What this would do is if you started and held these people accountable,
Okay,
it does two things. It will restore the public faith in the rule of law.
I agree.
Because right now you can't have all these people and anybody that's watched this stuff I mean, think about it. You're Joe Public out there
Mhm.
and he's getting bombarded from the time they started this Russian stuff. Every day you turn on the TV and you got all the networks in sync. Trump says, Trump said, boom, 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 the same storyline over the years. Well, you run into the situation where you start believing the lie. You don't know what's true and what's not.
Well, there it
Okay,
is
from
right
that
there.
standpoint.
The lie
And-
becomes a reality. Okay.
And here's what's sad: the agencies, people should be outraged,
Mhm.
like I
I
am.
agree.
The people that took the oath of office, the FBI agents, the leadership, the CIA agents, their job is to protect the country, not to go after and be a surrogate for a particular ideology or a political party. That's not how the federal government's supposed to work. You're supposed to be apolitical. You can have your personal views, but you cannot use your color of authority nor your position to investigate your political opponents. And that's where we're at today. We have the two-tier system. The only difference is they're using the old Russian tactics of show me the man, I'll show you the crime. I mean, I don't know how all these indictments will ever stand up in a court. And if they do go to a court, it's going to be in an area where the jury's either nullified because they've already got a preconceived notion. Hey, I'm on the jury that convicted Trump. I mean, with their political animus, the guy will never get a fair trial. And this is where the justice system, the Supreme Court, has to step up at some point and stop this rogue stuff by these judges of what's going on. Otherwise, then what are we doing here as a country? How do we stay together? And how do we move on as a country if we're not going to hold these people accountable? And that's where the difference is between your podcast and all the others that are out there. And they're doing a great job explaining all the new evidence and the truth, but they're not discussing at the end of the day, how do you hold them accountable? And that's where it comes in. So let's go to the timelines and let's run through this because we're going to move here. I'm just going to pick a few pertinent things out. The reason I did it this way is to allow you, the viewers, you can take a look at the slide as I'm speaking, and you can look at all the information in the timeline. 2005, this is the starting point. It's kind of funny. As I say, the Russian guy, DeVecchio, and who was he? He played a major role because he's the guy that was the primary source for Dolan that fed all the false information that he was given by Charles Dolan, who was a surrogate, a paid surrogate for the DNC and Hillary Clinton. Okay, so like the peeing on the bed, that's where that came into. That's how that information gets. It wasn't done by Sergio Milan or any of the other subsorts that Steele claimed he had, because they've already proved the Serial Milan was a figment of DeVecchio's information. He never had any, he had one conversation over a phone with this guy, and that was it. So everything that they taint Milan with, that he's some sort of Russian agent, is all total garbage. Again, to paint the scenario that the Russians are the responsible. My dogs are going crazy.
Okay.
So that's where you see that he was under investigation by the FBI, which is important. What did they do with this? If you got a guy and think about the people who did. He worked at the Brookings Institute, okay, for 5 years, and the Brookings Institute in the Durham findings was one of the main facilitators of the Steele dossier, were all the connections in the Brookings Institute that got fed to what we call circular reporting through State Department and all other areas on here. So that's how that comes together. So you've got to ask the question, excuse me, Brian, let me get
Go,
this.
go ahead. We have a pause. Well, John tends to his canine. I get it. Audience, again, this is for your edification. This is really
Okay,
serious.
so I'm back. So
Okay.
let me cover
Angle
this,
that
because
case.
this is the salient point here. They sold us a bill of goods that the Russians were the ones that were responsible for all this. Well, as you can see, the starting point goes back to 2005. What are the commonalities? Remember, I talk about the pattern of conspiracy, the association. Well, look at the association. Fiona Hill, friends with who? DeVecchio. She's also friends with Crystal Steele. She's the one that introduced DeVecchio, Steele, and Dolan to DeVecchio. So very, very important on that aspect. Let's go to the next slide. Let's move up a couple years here. We got in June of 2009. You got the FBI. They interview Page, okay? And they find out he's been reporting to the CIA. So you've got Page here, who's a known CIA asset, reporting to who? To the CIA on his information. What does the Bureau do with that information? Okay. He gets approached, I think, in 2013. And then, now on this slide, one thing I want to cover, 2011, which is really important. The president loosened the surveillance guidelines back there. What that allowed to do, it allowed the guidelines to be lowered. So all those tools in the NSA on spying capabilities could be used. And that's very important, because as you're going to see down the line on the timeline later on, that the court finds that the hundreds of American citizens' Fourth Amendment rights were violated. They were spying on American citizens all these years using the tools of the NSA. And the funny part with the NSA part, as I explained in one of the podcasts, was that they had an FBI contracting group in there during this time frame collecting all the NSA data. Okay, why that's important? They also had an office. The FBI had an office or a sub-office. Guess where? In the office of Perkin Coie, the law firm of who? The DNC.
Not
So
an undercover office.
You have to ask, why would a federal agency have an office inside a law firm that represents the Democratic National Committee from that standpoint? So now we're connecting the dots. We're jumping from the Vecchio, Brookings Institute, Fiona Hill, the introductions, Steele. You had Bruce Orr in there. I believe he was friends with Steele on one of the beginning slides, showing that he knew him through his association when he was an assistant U.S. attorney. So now you can start seeing how these dots start matching up on there. Then in 2012, you got Flynn, who gets appointed as director of the DEA by Obama. Then you have Clapper testify in the Senate committee, and this is the famous one where they ask him, well, is the NSA spying on Americans? Because that's when the Senate found out that some of the senators were being spied upon, and they had a hearing. And that's where Clapper gives his famous response, well, not unwittingly, or not wittingly, which is really interesting from that standpoint. Then we get a 213. Okay, 213 is important because that's where Page tells FBI he's been approached by these Russian agents posing as bankers, and they approached him at this seminar. He goes, tells the Bureau. They do an operation, I believe, in 213. They record the recordings. And on the recordings, the FBI, the Russians are calling Page an idiot and complaining, but it shows that Page was an active informant for the federal government. He wasn't an espionage agent. He wasn't a spy, as the media and everybody tried to paint this poor guy with. He actually ended up being a witness in a case in 2015 or 16 on one of the Russians that got convicted of espionage. So now you, the public, have to ask yourself the question: How can you paint a man like Page, who is an active source for the CIA, giving information to the FBI, and then the FBI later on, 3 years later, makes him out to be a Russian espionage agent? Think about that. That's what you need to think about, ladies and gentlemen. When you do these type cases, that's why you look at all these tidbits, little bits of information, and you go, how's this come together? Well, these are the building blocks of how this comes together. Okay. Then let's get into scope of vote. I believe on the prior slides back in 2011, you had Hillary Clinton trying to reboot with the Russians and on the scope of vote project. Why that's important is because she was working with big tech, Google and all the others, to go and help the Russians set up a mirror image of what we had in the Silicon Valley. Why is that important from a national security situation? Is because now you're going to get the Russians the ability that we have in the technological field, and also you're going to give them the ability to contact your education facilities like Massachusetts, MIT, and all the others. In fact, the military was so raised the red flag 2 years later and said we are, by allowing the Russians to have this access, is a national security situation, because they're going to be able to glob on the information and fortify or enhance their cyber or technological capabilities. That came true, ladies and gentlemen. A couple of years later, do you remember the missile system they were talking about, I believe a year or 2 years again, the hypersonic missiles? Well, that hypersonic missiles, that's where that information came out of, was the Russians being able to have access to our companies that were developing that kind of technology back in that time frame. So think about it. You have our own government giving the Russians access to our technology companies to do what? They're now our biggest adversary, according to the administration and the Obama administration. Whereas for him to get reelected, remember, he told the country the Russians were, hey, they're our friends. They, you know, in the famous when Crowley intervened in the 2012 interview between Obama and Romney, and she interjected herself, and Obama poo-pooed the Russians. Oh, that's old school, whatever. Now you see, here we are, fast forward, and who's the biggest proponents of saying the Russians are the worst of the worst in the deal? It's out of the Obama and the Biden folks. It's incredible. You can't make this stuff up. So as a criminal investigator, what you do is you go through all this and you start connecting the dots. How did they put together their plan? How does all these little tidbits come back together in a plan? Well, in 2014, you had the former director of MI6, is Richard Dearlove. He has the Cambridge Initiative. When Flynn was the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, they connect with all these type of people and academics and MI6 and everything else. He gets invited in on a private invitation to come over and give a lecture or a talk to the group, and they have a meeting. They also invite this female who's working for MI6, who happens to be the British historian for MI6, but was born in Russia. And then what comes out of that? Years later, you have Halpern with his buddy, this guy Andrews, who was part of this initiative out of Cambridge. They concoct the story, give it to the press, and that's when you start seeing these stories that Flynn was having an affair with this Russian agent who was a British historian, when this gal had nothing to do with anything other than being a Russian historian. So now you can see how they take information, they put out the false narrative, and they use it out there. And that's where you get all these kind of little tidbit stories coming out. By themselves mean nothing, but when they're repeated over and over again and nobody refutes them, now you see why you have the situation you have. So then you have Flynn, who resigns in April of 14. Then you have in June 14, you have the FBI interviews Pages again, and he reveals he's spoken to his handlers at the CIA, and he agrees that he will cooperate as a key witness in their undercover investigation on that Russian guy that was part of that ploy, the counter-espionage case that he brought to him. So that takes care of, let's go to this slide, summer of 14, and let's cover up to March of 2015. Okay. Allegedly, Brennan opens up a counterintelligence investigation into Flynn. I don't know if that's true or not. That's information I got from one of my sources who was part of the intelligence community. So when you get this kind of information, I don't put credence, whether it's verified or unverified. I just put it out there because it fits in the timeline. And if you do an investigation, this would be one of the things you would go back on to verify or unverify.
John, was your source real time or post?
Mine was a post.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, mine was after he had left the one of the agents or his job on there. Then you had in 2014, I mentioned Cozy Bear, that the Dutch intelligence service had broken into that. Then you got the first report from the New York Times in 2015 about Clinton's email account. Then you've got the FBI. This is funny. The FBI has a dossier on Steele, and he's in contact with 5 of the major Russian oligarchs. The one guy called Ola Deperperia, who Steele works with Bruce Orr to try to get a visa to early on back in the 2011, 12 timeframe, somewhere in there on the deal. So now you start seeing how all these connections happen. They happen because they worked with each other or they were associated professionally, how they come together. Then on October 15th, they hire Nellie Orr, Bruce Orr's wife, who was a CIA analyst. And her job at the time, and we explained this on the last podcast, they were tasked by the Free Beacon, by this guy named Singer, wanted to do opposition research on Republican candidates. And one of the candidates was Trump. So they hired his wife. She did all what we call these proto-dossiers. She did all the opposition research on Trump and spam, any association with overseas Russian business there. That's where all that comes out back in those first, what we call the proto-dossiers, okay? And that information then was kind of taken out and given to Cody Shear, and who is related to Bruce Talbert, who happened to run the Brookings Institute at the time. And that's where the Cody Shear dossier starts getting circulated in April of 2016. So now you can start seeing the original, how these base pieces start coming together of opposition research, using it to do what? Guilt by association theory that Glenn Simpson had on Fusion GGS. So that's really your starting point for the guilt by association. Okay. Then you had on 215, this is where I believe it all starts at. This is where the British notify Brennan and tell him about all these suspicious interaction between the people connected with Trump and no one suspected Russian. Notice they don't name names or verify who or what the information is. Everything is nefarious. Everything is when the intel branches use wording very well. They use wordsmith to use words like suspicious, interaction, as though it would be evidence of criminal culpability or evidence for a court of law. No, it's just unverified intel. I'll give you a great example of this. When I first came on the job in Denver, I was reading a report by an FBI agent, and 2 gentlemen go to have lunch, and I read the report, and the one guy was an organized crime guy, and the other guy was just a normal American citizen. However, the way the report read, that the normal American citizen, because he had lunch with the organized crime guy, was now a member of the organized crime family. So now you can see how raw intelligence can be used to misidentify or misassociate. What people need to understand is that a lot of these agents in the counterintelligence field, though they may be criminal investigators in name only, they're really not criminal investigators.
No.
They're intelligent investigators.
That's exactly.
The techniques and they use to put together counterintelligence cases are totally different from we do in criminal cases. The standard of evidence we have to use is we have to match up all the elements of the crime to be able to charge somebody. Under their system, it's a little more latitude because of the national security implications, because they're trying to protect sources and methods. So it's a little bit different, and the courts give them leeway in these situations. However, just because Intel said so doesn't make it so.
But John, I can't control myself on this comment because you nailed it. These Intel analysts, and I'm not picking on anybody. Yeah, you can go look up my career or John's and show me where I'm wrong. It's this whole system that we have now from the top to the bottom, and you're hiring Intel analysts out of Penn State, Ohio State, whatever. Okay, fill in the blank. Zero life experience, can't connect the dots amongst themselves, and now they're doing this kind of work. I'm not saying all of them, but you have to have some criminal background, some investigative background, work in a PD, work in a state police, a sheriff's department, do something so you understand how crimes and the elements of a crime come together. Because otherwise, what you have and what we hear all the time is we have academia types, and it just drives me insane every time I see it.
Well, that's why you have the problem you have now, is because you have so much disinformation out there. And remember, what you'll see in this timeline is a lot of the information that the intel agencies or the reporters reported in their stories were always anonymous. Anonymous intel.
And
it's like I believe the ones that got the Pulitzers that wrote the article in the New York Times that said the Steele dossier was verified. They verified the Signet information. That means they verified the convert. No, they never did. Never verified, and all total garbage. They lied to you, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, that's the problem here. Is these people use their positions, and this is how they were able to lie to you, by saying it's anonymous, or they would hide under what I call the classified system. We have the evidence, but it's classified. That seems to be the big standard. Well, I take it another way. If it's evidence of a crime trumps classified every day of the week on a thing. So if somebody committed a crime, then that crime, they should be held criminally responsible. You can't hide under the caveat of classified. I can tell you this, there are no sources and methods left that hasn't been disclosed out there, as Snowden has basically unraveled by showing that how bad the government was spying on people on this thing, that knowing that they could break in and they listen into every conversation basically of warehousing in the world. So I don't think there's anything to hide anymore on source and methods. People ought to realize government's listening on us, we listen on them. That's called tradecraft. That's how you stay one step ahead. However, you don't use those tools to go and criminalize and use them to go after your citizens. And that's the difference of where we're at today. So they created the big Russia, as I call it, the big Russia hoax, making the Russians the big bad bear. They're the ones that caused the problem. So let's move on to the next slide. Let's go later on. We're going to get into 216. So in 215, Flynn goes to Gala in Moscow for Russian TV. He's paid X amount of money. His photos taken with him and Putin. Happens to be there. Joseph Massoud was there at the gala. one of the women running for, I believe, the presidency, the Democratic, the female, she was, I believe, there. The one running now, I can't think of her name, but she ran before. So again, the appearance. What did they do with that? What did they do with that story? Well, they started to create a false narrative that Flynn was in Putin's pocket, and they were trying to get Halper, with the Bureau, was trying to run an undercover operation to get that female, the British historian, to say that, to use her to say that that photo and him of Putin causes all sorts of problems, which is total garbage on the thing. That's how they create the false, as we say, the false flag, the false narrative. Remember, Christopher Steele was a known expert in creating false flags. That's what they're trained in. The CIA guys, that's what they're trained in. How to look you in the eye, lie to you, make you to believe what they're telling you is the truth when it's all facade. And that's one of the major trade crafts of these false flag operations.
Steele was MI6, right?
He was an MI6, and Dearlove was his mentor, who was head of MI6 at the time. And when Steele retired and started his company, Dearlove left and became part of the Cambria initiative out of Cambria University. And who were some of the players? Stephen Halper, professor at Cambridge. This guy, Andrews, friend of Halper's and a friend of Dearlove. So that's where that started. So when I say connecting the dots on a conspiracy case, that's why I say brick by brick, you go back and you say, well, where's the association evidence? How did DeVecchio, a person under investigation by the Federal Bureau of Investigation for being a suspected agent for the Russian government, and they lose track of him, becomes the main guy helping in the Steele dossier that creates this mess that leads us into now. He was a Russian. He was born in Russia. If anybody was a Russian agent, somebody ought to verify, is he still part, or did they ever determine? And why didn't they determine? And going back to the credibility of the FBI, who are these agents? Why didn't they do their job? How do you lose a Russian spy in the US? I'd like to know. Because he took a trip to Russia? And
somebody
you say,
doesn't know what they're doing, man.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah, somebody. I mean,
yeah, I just want to bring that out for the public to show you the hypocrisy and the garbage that they tell you. Us being professionals, we see through this. We're going, who are these guys? And why are they getting paid to be agents? Because they have no reason to be trust me.
right.
They shouldn't be sitting in carrying a gun and a badge.
Well, that's what it is. They give them the title, they hire them out of whatever university, and you get the title. And now, you're Detective Joe Friday, if anybody remembers who that was. And it's crazy. Anyway, go ahead, John, move on. Sorry.
Well, this is where this is why I go back to the unmasking and the National Security Division part is so important, because this is where the newspapers started reporting that the Obama administration got spying on Israeli government. They were spying on American Jewish citizens in the United States. So that's in December, that starts coming out. Then you have a big problem in 2015 where you had the 50 intel analysts complaining that the reports on ISIS were being watered down to show that ISIS was not a big problem. They weren't all these bad guys, and they fought back and they started filing complaints, which caused internal investigations. 3 House committees later, they investigate, and what did they find out? They found out that the Obama administration politicized the intelligence product to water it down for political reasons in the 2014, 2015. Why is that important? Because politically, that's what was coming out of the Obama, that the terrorists weren't an issue, that we have it under control. Okay, so when you start putting this stuff together, now you can start seeing the political angles of what these guys do, just like the political angle on the gun situation on Fast and Furious. It was always about gun control, regardless of whether to make a means to an end. regardless of whether you follow the law or don't. So those are just examples setting up the pattern of the deception of the big lie. So let's go into 216. This is, you've got this Patrick Burns guy, the Overstock guy. Now, this is an unusual one. He's claiming that he was an FBI source. He doesn't claim he was an FBI. He says he worked for the government, but he doesn't claim he was actually. Well, Brian, you and I know that if a federal agency is using a person, they're signed up. They are a source. You can couch it whatever you want, but Burns, whether he likes it or not, was an FBI source. And he's documented this. He put out a magazine. I believe he wrote a book on this. He said he was a source. He was part of an FBI operation where they wanted to do this thing called Snow Globe, where they wanted to get Hillary Clinton and offer a bribe of millions of dollars. And he was part of that. And what he claims is that they set it up. The agents that he worked with came to him afterwards and said, forget about all this. And what Burns is claiming, the reason why this was done and why the Bureau did what they did in Obama was so Obama could keep her, they all thought she was going to be the next president, was for Obama to keep her in check on following whatever his game plan was. So she didn't steer off course. That was what Burns is claiming. But he also claimed this other part, which is quite interesting, is his Peter Strzok was one of his controlling agents. And he was seeing this Russian gal by Maria Butina, who later on gets convicted in 2018, serves a year in jail, and then gets shipped back to Russia. She was being used, according to Burns, being run into the Republican presidential candidates. And why would you do that if this gal is allegedly a Russian source for the Russian government? You got an FBI agent on counterintelligence. If this is true, I'm not saying it is or not. I'm just telling you what this man is claiming, what his truth is. And all the people that in his past that he worked with seemed to verify the U.S. attorneys and the Senate people back in the 2, 6, 7, 8 period kind of verify or vouch for his information. So why would he be lying now if he wasn't lying then? So that's something, again, ladies and gentlemen, it's another facet that if we conducted a real investigation, it would be one of those things that you would definitely want to look into on the thing from that standpoint. I'd be calling those I'd be calling those handlers in, putting them under oath and getting the records of those CI files and finding out what were they involved in? What was this all about? And is there any truth to the matter? Because if there's truth to the matter that actually happened where the FBI tried to frame a presidential candidate, okay, for bribery, for political purposes, not to charge her, but to hold it over her head, that's a big thing, a real big thing, as you can see. And this is why in our job, until you verify it, it's information. You don't put credibility to it. You go and you investigate it. You find out whether it's true or it's not. This would be very easy to prove one way or the other. Very easy for a criminal investigator to prove what Patrick Burns is saying. Is there any meat behind? Is there any fire behind the smoke? So that's what I'm saying.
John, you want to touch on Manafort? Yeah,
very, very important. Then you've got in 216. Now you got Mr. Halpert. Who's Halpert? He works at Cambridge. He's part of this Cambridge seminar, bringing in Russian speakers, generals, and people that are associated with the Russian government. He's the one that has all the real connections with the Russians. Where's Halpert play into this whole thing? Halpert is the source that the FBI and maybe the CIA use to go after. He runs into Papadopoulos. He tries to run into Page, and he tried to run into Sam Clovis. He's the guy that was behind setting up the newspaper reports with his buddy Andrew in The Guardian and other leaking it to the news that Flynn had these associations with this Russian gal, and that he was a player with Putin and that for going to this dinner. And so now you can see you're painting the reputation of the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, or the former head, as being a Russian agent. Does anybody really believe that General Flynn, a three-star general who's a total patriot from, when you look at it, who served his country, was one of the top guys who reorganized intel? You can give him credit for reorganizing the intel part in the war zones. Otherwise, Al-Qaeda and all these groups could still be killing soldiers at a face. He was the one that revamped it all. So we owe that man a debt of gratitude instead of tainting him and ruining him as a Russian agent. Total disgrace on this stuff. Then we've got in 216, you've got a whistleblower, this guy Lovinger, who blows the whistle on Halpern that he's getting paid $1 million to off the books to set up for the Defense Department to bring in all these different people. And it wasn't a kosher thing. And instead, what does the government do? He's a whistleblower, so they take away his security clearance on the thing. Not Halpern's, but his. So it just shows you what goes on and why people don't want to be whistleblowers on the deal. Then you've got January 216. FBI opens up their money laundering investigation on Manafort. Let's go to the next slide.
Got it.
Okay.
You should be.
We got January. Steele meets. He meets with. He's lobbying on the behalf of who? He's lobbying on behalf of Olga Pasa. That's the guy. If you just the FBI agent that just got convicted and pled out in the paper, I believe today. This guy that was head of the FBI squad in New York. He was working with this guy, Olga Pepa. That was part of, I believe, in the criminal stuff that he was working on behalf or with this gentleman. So it just goes to show you the links. Or at the time is a DAG. He's a deputy attorney general at DOJ. Think about that one. And there he is lobbying on behalf of a Russian government oligarch that Steele has done a lot of work on the thing. So it just shows you again the tie-ins. Then you've got in February, that's where you have Fiona Hill introduces Dachenko to the Clinton operative Dolan and puts Dolan in with him, and that's where DeVecchio takes the information, gives it to Steele. So now you can see how this all starts coming together. And again, the tie-in with Fiona Hill, she works at the Brookings Institute. At the time, they were one of the main purveyors of circular reporting through all their contacts within the, and I'm not saying this surreptitiously, this is what Durham did. He subpoenaed the Brookings Institute and he documented all the who did what, when, and where as far as circular reporting from who met with who they gave the dossier to. So Durham does get credit for doing and putting the pieces of the puzzle together of how the fake dossier got circulated throughout the whole government, taking a document and circulating it, coming in from other sources to make it appear that each one is a new source, thus giving credibility to the document, when in reality, it's the same information, just reprogrammed from different sources. So that's how they do these false flags to give the appearance, taking the gist of the information to make it appear that it's coming from very other credible sources. To give the illusion that there's credibility behind the information when there is none. That's how they did it from that standpoint. So then in March, you've got Brennan flying to Moscow to meet with his counterparts at the Federal Security Bureau. Then what's an interesting deal in March, you've got Comey Professor Massoud, and Clapper, they're all in Australia at the same time. Coincidence? Maybe. On a deal. So you just have to, again, these are things you'd want to look at and investigate and see if there's on what these associations are. Then you've got, on March 9th, you've got the report, the oversight report, and this is real key. This really started the whole nightmare for the Obama administration, because this is where the audit of the NSA records come in. And that's where they found that the FBI was employing these private contractors, and they were conducting all these analysts were taking all this information and doing all these inquiries using the NSA databases, basically violating the law. That's basically what they were doing. And to this day, ladies and gentlemen, that FBI contracting unit has never been identified, nor has it ever been shown where they're at today and what they did with the information. If that's not a national security issue, I don't know what is from that standpoint. Then in March 16, or in March 2000, I believe that is where the entrapment operations begin, where the FBI and the CIA are involved in entrapping Trump's people. Because you have the first meeting, March 14th, Papadopoulos meets with Massoud in Italy. And then on March 21st, you have Trump introduces his foreign policy team of Page, Papadopoulos, Flynn, and Carter. And then you have on March 24th, the second meeting between Papadopoulos and Massoud. And that's where, what's funny on this meeting on March 24th, that's where Massoud allegedly brings his female that claims to be a niece or whatever to Putin and introduce him here in this meeting in London. And that she has connections to, or showing Massoud's telling Papadopoulos he's got connections to high-level Russians. What's interesting about this is that female was never identified when Mueller's team interviewed Massoud. And this is the kicker, ladies and gentlemen. Why this information doesn't match up in all these reports is when Mueller's team interviewed Massoud, Massoud denied ever telling Papadopoulos that the Russians had information, had all the email traffic on Hillary. So my question is, if he denied it to the Mueller team, and the Mueller team and Papadopoulos had, by this time, had already, they knew that Papadopoulos had I believe, done his statements that he had pleading out or that admitting to that he met with Massoud, and this is what Massoud told him. So he's only report what he told. The key point on this whole thing is that the information that allegedly Papadopoulos was supposed to get the Trump team interested in, the Trump team never took the information. Sam Clovis and those guys just blew him off. So there was never, ever any information that ever came about from those meetings with Massoud through Papadopoulos to Trump as the newspapers and everybody tried to claim occurred. It did not. And that's very important. And why wasn't Massoud charged by Mueller's team for lying? Another question. And who is Massoud? Okay, those are the questions that need to be answered. As I told you in one of the podcasts that Durham and Bill Barr went over to Italy, met with Massoud's lawyer. They were given a tape by Massoud's lawyer that claims he was a Western intel analyst. Also, they were given 2 cell phones allegedly that Massoud had been given by the FBI. So those are the questions. And how do we know the cell phones are true? Because in the one recent hearing they just had, I think a couple of weeks ago, Congressman Gates asked Durham about the cell phone, and he didn't deny it, which was quite interesting, I found. So let's go to April the 1st. April is a key month. What happens? The FBI, the same FBI in New York, who had used Page as a source on an espionage case 2 years prior, is now opening up an investigation on Carter Page at the direction, not of them, at the direction of FBI headquarters. Why? I can't answer that question. Then you've got the alleged meeting at the White House between Comey, Clapper, Lynch, and Rice to discuss the Trump foreign policy team. Why would they need to have a meeting between the head of the FBI, the head of the National Intelligence, the Attorney General, and the National Security Advisor? Why?
John, if I may, why do you say alleged? Why?
Well, because the information that was given to me, that's the date it occurred. I don't have any way to verify that, so I always put alleged if I don't have the verifying information.
For the audience.
That to me is, again, if we did an investigation, this would be easy to verify. Subpoena the records of the White House, who went in on that day or those days, was there any meetings, and these four people, whatever, and what were the notes taken in the meeting. That's all. Again, to the public, this is how you would verify this kind of stuff. You get information. As an investigator, we go to the steps. Okay, how do we prove that? Did it occur? If it did occur, that adds more credence, and you do more work to what did they talk about? And that's how you do these cases. Doing the homework, connecting the dots, putting the bricks by themselves, ladies and gentlemen. As you can see, we're in 2/16 April right now. We're walking up to the main event in July. Right now, you should have a real clear picture from 2005 to now. These individual instances by themselves, you'd never be able to put them together if you didn't look at it on how the dots are connected. And that's what we're doing to hopefully for you, the public, so you can understand the scope and extent of how well-designed this nefarious plan was and why you have to use the conspiracy statute to dismantle it from there. Now, and you've got on April 5th, which is a real key event for me. If I was for evidence-wise, you have Mike Rogers, the NSA, testifying before Congress of the discoveries of the FBI accessing all the NSA information, and they were in violation of all this stuff. Then on that same day that Roger testifies, you see a text, which I call documentary evidence, showing from Lisa Page, sent it to Peter Strzok, need to fix a huge F-up. Page quickly corrected her typo by texting WFO, Washington Field Office, abbreviation for the FBI field. Page would later send another text on the same day noting, need to go meet with Annie. Who's Annie? Annie McCabe. Annie was then deputy director of the FBI. So why would these two, Strzok and Page, go shit hits the fan when they just learned that they were on to the FBI contracting unit, gathering all this information, that the tools and the abilities to do what? Spy on American citizens. Very important, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, let's go to the next day in April. You've got Brennan puts together 2 task forces. This has been verified. How was it verified? It was verified through a retired CIA agent that worked at the CIA at the time, was there at the time, and he wrote about this, that Brennan formed these task forces. They were very selective, very secretive. You had to be on one of the teams to get in or be involved in this. And and who were they? What they do? They formed what they call fusion cells. So you had one in the FBI, one at the CIA. They formed task forces of analysts. And who were the targets? Again, you've got them: Halpern, Flynn, Manafort, from that. So now you can see in April, you've got the intelligence apparatus already doing what? They're investigating who? People that are going to be on Trump's foreign policy team. The question is, why? Based on what? Well, according to Brennan, it's based on the SIGINT information. Remember, the SIGINT information is they're listening in on conversations of the Russians, and they're picking up all this one-sided verbiage or these conversations, and that's what they're feeding to Brennan and the European countries. So that's now you can start seeing the formation of how this plan starts coming together. from that standpoint. Next slide. Then in April, you have the DNC and the Clinton campaign retained through Mark Elias, they retain Fusion GPS. That's important because what do they get? She pays for the Nellie Orr documents, which were those proto dossiers, which broke down the 3 different areas and all the business and everything else. And from that point on, that's when you started setting the stage from here all the way up till the end of 2016 of all these crazy stories that Trump was involved with, Russian organized crime, and his daughter was, and this Peter Sater guy. So, I mean, a tremendous amount of stuff. Here I'm kind of just breaking down the important stuff to show the dots. Then on April 10th is a real critical day. You have the President of the United States in his famous interview with Chris Wallace on Fox News, and interviewed him, and he says that he publicly stated that Hillary Clinton had shown carelessness in using a private email service to handle classified information. However, he insisted Clinton had not intended to endanger national security.
Right.
Now think about that for a second. That's what you call obstruction. Now think about it. They wanted to charge. They wanted the left wanted to have Mueller and his 18 cohorts charge Trump because they couldn't find any Trump-Russian collusion. But they wanted to charge him for what, ladies and gentlemen? They wanted to charge him with obstruction for a comment that he made about Flynn that he made, that Comey said, well, he shouldn't be, whatever. And they wanted to charge Trump with obstruction, but here you have actual enclave obstruction. Now, what did that do? What problem did that cause? That's what's important there is the language used is the language that Comey used in his famous July 5th exoneration or clearance of Hillary Clinton. That was the premise he used, that yes, she was careless, but she really didn't violate any laws, which is total garbage, because they never actually, if they were applying the elements and the evidence and the standards, Hillary Clinton would have been a charge, be doing time. So now you see how that tool-deer system of deal. And why did they do that? Because they knew everybody at that time in 2016 of April thought Hillary Clinton was a dead shoe-in. She was going to be the next president of the United States, period. And the FBI agents and the management didn't want to upset the apple cart. That's why they did what they did. What they did was criminal. Okay? Let me make that clear, ladies and gentlemen. What these people did, using their color of authority and doing what they did, they made a conscious decision to violate their oath of office to be part of this conspiracy. To do what? To destroy Trump, to keep him from becoming president. That's really important. So then you see in April, you start seeing some of the news reports from Crawley puts out the Kremlin candidate. This is setting up Flynn. He attended the banquet and he sat next to Putin. So now they're starting setting the disinformation theme through the media and start putting it out to the public of setting those tentacles out to build the false narrative. Let's see. Next slide. Then in May, you've got Comey drafts a statement, and that's the one that clears Hillary using the thing. But you also have in there, you have on May 4th, excuse me, before the July 5th statement, on May 4th, you have an important text. And this to me would be documentary evidence to show the intent by the director to clear Clinton, okay, based on what Obama directions he's given Comey. Because in this email or this text is pretty well self-explanatory here. They're talking about the change in the language. In fact, at the end there, Strzok says he changed the president to another senior government official. So to even, again, keep distance from Obama being involved on his comments on giving Hillary Clinton a pass. So now you should be able to see, ladies and gentlemen, you had the famous tarmac meeting, remember, between Lynch and Hillary's husband, Bill. Then you had the FBI doing everything that they could to jump through hoops to somehow make it. They already had, when you look at the evidence of what they had on her, you had classified documents on her email, some of which one of the sources says one was a real damning piece of classified information that impacted stuff in Libya. So you had this kind of documentation that was damaging to U.S. national security. And who knows, God knows what else is on that, was on those, her computer system. And they all came out, again, they came out of a closed intel system. You just can't walk into these skips, grab the information, download it on a deal, and walk out, and nobody's going to be coming knocking on your door saying, John, did you just download classified information? And is that on that thing? Well, they'd be locking me up for that right now if I had done that. That is why you have security clearances. That's why you have a sensitive compartmentalized deal. That's why you have 2 separate or 3 separate systems inside the government and computers on cloud where the stuff is stored at on there. So somebody had, think about this, ladies and gentlemen, somebody in the Clinton campaign or working for Hillary Clinton had to go into these classified systems, either copy it or somehow record it, take that information, and then transfer it to Hillary to put on her private email server. That's how it gets. As I said in a conspiracy, remember, A equals B, C happens. Here's a great example of how that comes together. So then you have, on May 5th, this is important. The media, without the media, none of what we're looking at today, where we're at in the country, could come together if the media, they play one of the largest roles in this conspiracy case. And one of the telling factors on is this article that Ben Rose wrote in May of 2016, where he basically says, we run it. We give the media the talking points we want them to get, and we create the echo chamber, which I thought is telling, because it tells you that the media isn't in cahoots or working together with the administration on getting their story. That's why I would say as evidence, all you got to do is turn on your news channels, and what do you get every day? You get the same talking points by this network, and it goes all the way through the chain of the others, and they use the same verbiage almost verbatim. Russian agent, Russian agent, Russian agent. Right.
And John, that's all the way down to your local networks. Even your local networks, they're just, that's imaging. It's almost like they're all scripted, really.
Oh, it's incredible.
Incredible.
They've done. You just can't make that. It's Mark Twain says, you keep telling when the search for the truth no longer means anything, and the big lie becomes the truth, because the person, how do you stop that when the person believes the lie over the truth? Well, that's where we're at today. And that's why we're doing these podcasts, to educate you, the voter. You get the decision to make on what you want to do. In 14 or 15 months, you, me, everybody is going to have their say on which direction this country goes. And that's what I'm saying to you, is take that time and decide wisely where you want to go. All right, next slide.
Okay.
There's allegedly there's a 302 in June 6th of 2016. Where I believe an intel analyst working for one of the agencies or contracting came into the Bureau and reported to them that he was doing research or whatever, and he found that there was a compromising document in the Hillary server information. It compromised U.S. national security information from Libya. And he gave that, he met with the Bureau on that day, on June 6, 2016. The Bureau wrote up a 302, I believe, Gateway Pundit reported, but nobody ever looked at it. Nobody ever verified, interviewed the guy that wrote it or prevented it. Whether, again, just like the information from Patrick Burns, is it true or is it not? This is something I would think a criminal investigator, somebody would want to investigate and look at. Just another thing. The other thing. Then you got the more text from Struck in June on there talking about the Lynch's decision on that Hillary wasn't going to be charged. So you have that information ahead of time before Comey exonerates her or clears her. So you just have, again, more tidbits of information. When you start looking at this, who does what, when, where, and why, this is how you put this stuff together and where it comes in and means, where the meaning of it comes in from that standpoint. Next slide. All right, now we're into July, and this is the best month. This is where it all comes together, ladies and gentlemen. I can't stress this is the most important month of the whole thing because this will tell you how the conspiratorial plan comes together, which is the amazing part on this. You have in the remnants of the Struck email talking about that they're going to clear Hillary. Then the CIA learns that the Russian intelligence service has infiltrated the Steele dossier using Igor Dichenko. Okay, so the CIA is admitting that they still think Dichenko is a Russian asset. So that's where you get that basis in the reporting that the Steele dossier was a Russian disinformation document. Okay, because if Dichenko is a Russian intelligence agent or part of, then they're correct in their reporting. But however, Dichenko set up and the DOJ or the DOJ IG reported in their notes that Sergio Milan was the Russian agent. And that's where you have comments from the GPS guy Simpson telling Steele and others that Sergio Milan is a Russian asset. Well, Milan is not a Russian agent. He's not part of any of that. But now you can see for what? To protect the Vecchio deal? So this is a question I would have if I was doing investigation. This is one of the first things I would look at is the Vecchio. Does he still have Russian contacts? Was he a Russian agent? End of story. You have to settle that first, because if he was, then you get the whole storyline that he was feeding Steele. Even though Dolan was a political operative feeding some of the stuff, the Vecchio was the one controlling, giving the information to Steele, because all Steele stuff came from the Vecchio on this deal. So those are some of the things that need to be ferreted out from the standpoint. And then you have the early part of the slate. This is interesting. Now, Alpha Bank hasn't come up in the reporting. Now you've got a newspaper article, and what do they do in July? For this Frank Foyer, and who is this guy? Frank Foyer is the guy on working with Fusion GPS on those emails, talking about Alpha Bank. So Alpha Bank is already being discussed way ahead before they even have the meetings and putting together the agreement to go and create the cyber tools to create the Alpha Bank Rouge. And this was done way back when, in early July. So July is important because then Comey clears Clinton on the 5th. And then you've got Andrew McCarthy, who did a great job of showing the public that Comey didn't make the decision. It was Obama's decision. And he explains how it was Obama's decision because it's the same verbiage used by Comey in his clearance letter that Obama used on his TV interview, which is important. That's what you call association. That doesn't happen by happenstance. That was a directive the president telling Comey back when you're not charging her, no, and get this thing done with, end of story. So that's if we want to talk interference, there's your interference. Then you have on July 5th, what happens? This is where all the stuff happens. Steele goes, contacts, and they set up the meeting with the FBI agent, Gaeta in Rome. He flies to London, has the meeting with Steele. Guess who approves Gaeta to fly to London to meet Steele? Victoria Nuland. Yeah, who's she? She's the one that was involved. Again, another surrogate in this whole thing. Another one of these commonalities that go from the Obama to the Biden administration. Circumstantial, coincidence? I don't think so, ladies and gentlemen. So you start, like I said, you can't make it up. Then you got Steele testifies that he met with Simpson, Fusion GPS, and the understanding was the ultimate client of the dossiers was going to be Clinton. She knew what was going on and what they were going to do with the Russian dossiers, how they were going to do it. So it starts with your implication process of the agreement. So now you've got the Hillary DNC right there, the initial agreement to do what? Do a false document, manufacturing information to do what? Interfere in the 2016 election. That's where you're getting the basis of the conspiratorial agreement. Two or more people doing what? Conspiring for an objective. There's your objective. Then we've got the WikiLeaks releases the DNC emails. Then you've got a story by Bill Kristol now tying Team Trump to Russia and Manafort and all that other stuff. Then you've got, this is important, this is the key. You've got the head of the British Intel, Robert Reagan, send a classified document to Brennan in July that's deemed so sensitive. And basically, we now know that what was in there was the reporting by the British Intel that they'd intercepted Russian Syncline information, that the Russians had intercepted Hillary Clinton people and discussing how they were going to institute the plan to taint Trump with Russian collusion to basically interfere in the election. That was huge because that sets off the bells and whistles. That's where now, think about this. Everything is set up. They had done entrapment operations. Those things went nowhere. So they set this part of the plan up. Now it's open. The adversaries, what's so ironic here, ladies and gentlemen, the big bad Russians who they're making to be the responsible party for all that went wrong in the 2016 election happen to be the guys who intercept their nefarious plan to do what? To interfere in the 2016 election. Incredible. This one you cannot make up, ladies and gentlemen. That is as crystal clear as I can make it for you. If you don't understand that, then I can't help you, but it's a crystal clear. That was the original agreement. That's what starts the Russian hoax conspiracy, but it gets better. Let's go down. The New York Times then kicks out an article talking about that they concluded that the Russians were behind the theft of WikiLeaks. Now, let me stop right there. The New York Times put that out. Remember, at that time, you had CrowdStrike came out around that time in June, and that said the Russians were behind the hacks. Now you got the New York Times saying that. You also know today on the testimony of the CrowdStrike guy that they were never, ever to be able to say that the Russians were behind and got the information on the WikiLeaks emails. Nobody's been ever able to say that with any kind of proof or consistency, all based on, again, intel, unverified intel. And unverified intel is not evidence in a court of law. Okay. 28. This is where we get the handwritten notes on the 28th. This is where the notes are declassified, and you find out in the notes what Brennan writes on there, that on July 26th, okay, the notes are released. He writes the notes on the 28th that the Russians had intercepted the plane on the 26th. And so he's taking that information he's getting from the Brits, and that's where his notes come from. Okay. Then you've got when you look in sequence here, you've got now the 28th, the FBI is counterintelligence is gearing up on Papadopoulos. You have the 28th, they received 2 of the Steele election reports. Then on the 28th, you've got the text from Lisa Page to McCabe, and it's talking about the article by Lawfare. Now, Lawfare, let me explain this one. Lawfare people running that were associated with who? The Brookings Institute. So you've got the legal people in Lawfare with the analysts in Brookings Institute, 2 leaning left or Democratic political centers. So when you start connecting the dots, now you start seeing where all this, now you've got legal people starting to paint the picture on this, on where this investigation is going on this thing. Next slide. Okay, so late 16, after you have a meeting between Steele and Orr meet, and what does Steele do? He calls McCabe and passes on Steele's information that Trump was in Putin's pocket. And again, you have the tie-in. Orr knew McCabe from his days of working organized crime cases in New York. So now you see the tie-ins between all the different facets of all the different, from the investigators to the prosecutors. It's kind of, when you start doing the dots, you start getting the same people, the same roles, the same familiar associations on how people come together. It's kind of like a drug case. On when you are doing an organized crime case of any manner, you identify the people, you break out what roles they play in the organization, you start piecing together and timelining and start connecting the dots on how they're associated, communications, meetings, whatever. So you start building what, again, I use that phrase, a pattern of conspiracy, so you're able to show it. And so when you have to testify in front of a jury, you can explain this in simple terms of how this all comes together, so that you, the public, can understand how you were lied to and bamboozled by the king of bamboozles. I call him the man behind the curtain, President Obama. In fact, I got a key phrase for him. I call him, there's an old song, Mr. Bojangles, on the deal. I call him Mr. Banzoomel. Okay, because he's the man behind the curtains, and you will, as we get into the end here. So then you got the more text information from Struck to Page that they're talking about how great this is and everything else, that they're going to start this case on Trump and his people, and it begins what you call the insurance policy. Let's go to the next slide. This is at the end of July now, and this is really the key part of the whole presentation today. You've got the opening case document on July 31st by Peter Struck, his electronic communication on there, and opening his case. And he opens it also under FARA, which is the Foreign Registration Act, Agent Registration Act. The problem is, where was the evidence? Where was any of the information that there was any FARA violations on anything up to this point? Because if you remember, Mr. and Mrs. Public, back in June, what were we told about how this investigation got started? It got started in a meeting in May between Papadopoulos and the Australian ambassador over a beer, where allegedly the Australian ambassador claims that Papadopoulos told him that the Russians had Hillary's emails. That's what we were told, which was the genesis or the origins for the FBI investigation. Now, I hope you can see by looking at the timeline that this was all put in motion way back in April and we're being set up way back in December. So you can kind of see how these dots and how this stuff starts coming together on this. Now, on the 31st, you've got on the you got the Yahoo News. They're the first ones, and they don't report this until a year ago or 2 years ago, that there were these secret White House meetings right after Brennan briefed Obama on that the Russians had intercepted Hillary's plan. My personal and professional opinion is I believe they panicked because they realized with that. Now think about this. You have used the tools of the National Security Division for the last 6 or 7 years, spying on Americans for political purposes. All that information would be coming out if Trump wins the election, if you don't do something to stop this guy from getting elected. That's why they had major concerns on Michael Flynn, on why they had to destroy Flynn, because Flynn would have found what Rogers found, and what the FISA court ruled on in October was that for years, the Obama administration had been violating American citizens' rights. So that, to me, is where the panic sets in, and their criminality. And also that's a crime. Wherever the pundits want to say that it's not, it's an error, or it's a merit, like they want to say it's an error in reporting. It's not an error in reporting on this. When you're an investigator or analyst and you're taking sensitive information from there and you use it for political reasons, that's a crime. Am I correct on that, Brian?
That is correct. No doubt about it.
Okay. So then you get in to the information. There was some great reporting on this later on by Technofog, this guy who happens, I believe, is a lawyer, Margaret Cleveland, who's a renowned lawyer and was a professor at Notre Dame, and Gateway Pundit, who reported the things of the meeting, which should really raise serious problems here and should be investigated for this reason. They held secret meetings in the basement, and the meetings were, the sound was shut off. That only selected people were invited to these key meetings, and they're listed on the slides there. I'm not going to go through them all, but you have a lot of the same people involved that were involved today from there. And the funny part about it, the one key person that you would think that would be involved in the meeting would be Mike Rogers. But they didn't trust Mike Rogers. Why? Because Mike Rogers was the one that caused the problem by ordering the NSA audit back in April that discovered all the use of the unmasking system, of using the tools of the NSA to do what? Spy on American citizens. So remember when Trump came out and he said he was spied upon? And everybody laughed at him, and the British laughed at, everybody laughed at the man. Well, in reality, folks, he was spied upon. That's the sad truth. So that's where that comes on. So now this is where I ended at as the conspiratorial agreement. And why I say that is because instead of Obama being the president of the United States and stopping the Hillary Clinton DNC conspiratorial agreement to interfere and taint Trump with Russian collusion, what does the Obama administration do? What does President Obama do? Well, you've got the CIA director, Brennan. He instructs Comey to open up the 4 cases on the FBI, counterintelligence cases, on the Trump team. And that's where we're at today. When Strzok opened up the salvo on the 31st, that's when it opens up the whole thing. So think about this. Where's the crime in all this? We're going to get into next week. I'm going to discuss from here on out, we're going to break it down. We've discussed now the conspiratorial agreement. You now know of what the agreement was about and what they did and what was the purpose of the agreement. Now we're going to get in from the weeks from now to the end. We're going to connect the overt acts of how the overt acts connect, the players involved, what they did. That way, now you will see how over the span of what, we're on the 7th year, how this all comes together as a conspiracy case. And why is this important to you? Think about this. The left right now has indicted a former president on, God, what, 40 charges all over the place? And their big theme is that he's a clear and present danger to U.S. democracy. I'm sorry, folks, but the threat to U.S. democracy is these folks in charge right now. You have the biggest intel failure in U.S. history. You have the biggest breach of national security, vulnerable to blackmail by foreign adversaries. You have the most successful espionage, false flag operation run by your government, a corrupt government, against you, the citizens of the United States, which has adversely impacted our public trust in our institutions. And the only way we're going to ever restore that and get back to the basis is, again, get back to the theme that no one is above the law, is in 14 or 15 months, you, the citizens, will have the ability to determine which fork in the road do we go. Do we go down the road to restore the rule of law, or we do go down the road to be a banana republic and be under of where, hey, show me the man, I'll show you the crime. It's your choices. That's what we're doing here today. I hope I didn't put people to sleep. Oh, I want to make two real quick key points. National security. Again, I want to throw this out. In March of 2016, Obama got rid of the CIA unit that was in charge of countering Russian cyber and Russian infiltration in our election systems. He got rid of that unit that had been operating for 40 years. And again, the question that nobody wants to ask, the media, nobody, why? And why doesn't want anybody ask Obama? What did he know and when did he know it? So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you get a clear picture.
John, my head hurts. I just want you to know that. That was, that's pretty incredible, my friend. And I hope that everybody got something out of that. We're sorry about audience that you may need a couple adult beverages to sit through all of that. But if you notice that John had a recall and just went through the whole thing, and we're talking almost 2 hours or somewhere right around there. That's incredible. We might have to break it out into two, but John, I have learned a lot about this organization. Can I even call it that? This conspiratorial criminal element. I didn't really have to. I can honestly say I really didn't know all the elements. I really did not. And your research is impeccable. It's mind-boggling. It really is. Now, with that being said, again, I ask, and if when we come back next week, make sure you come up if there's any malfunctions that you came up with. If there's any, it's something that you find that was last week, a wrong name or whatever, because they'll crucify us. Audience, you got to do your homework. You got to do it, and you got to pay attention. This is our country. You, me, John, everybody. Okay, this is our country, and we are at a critical stage. My Lord. So, with that being said, John, any fast or roll-up parting remarks?
Yeah, I'll leave you with one thing which I found very, very enlightening. Last year, Obama gave a speech before in Stanford talking about disinformation. And one of the pertinent points he made was the internet is a tool, social media is a tool, and at the end of the day, tools don't control us, but we control the tools. And we can remake them what we want them to do.
Wow.
I think that is so pathetic, folks, of why and where we're at today.
Take the big F word. Take the F out of freedom. All right. And
You got it.
me and John are in our senior years, but I'm sure in the audience there's more than just us. You got to fight for it, man. You got to fight for it. John, thank you very much as usual. Like I said, my head hurts. Hope I kept up with you. And anything else, John? Artie?
That's it, baby.
Okay. Everybody else out there, peace if you can find it, man. It's a tough thing. Look at your cable news. Love, is that how they do that these days?
Yeah.
Not everybody's in that game, I can honestly say. And strength, man. You gotta develop your strength. Thank you very much. See you next week, John. Take care.
You got it. Bye-bye, Brian.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.